Hey everyone, welcome back to Talkin' Soccer. I am your host, Justin Horniker, and again, coming to you live from my parents' house in St. Louis. I'll be traveling back this weekend, so we'll have some better backgrounds back, I promise. We're going to talk a bit about the Chicago Red Stars, the investigation into Arnim Whisler and Rory Dames, and what we should expect Sally Yates' independent investigation into what Arnim Whisler knew about Rory Dames' previous allegations and actions of abuse during his time with the Red Stars. So we're going to touch on both of those aspects because it's kind of different. On one hand, there were abuse claims that we'll get into here in a second, levied at Rory Dames when he was with the Chicago Eclipse. And then, of course, there is some more verbal abuse claims levied at him during his time with Chicago Red Stars, most famously by Kristen Press. So one of those is a little bit heavier than the other, not to say that his verbal abuse is what Kristen Press called, it seemed like that sexist behavior. I don't want to say that isn't important here because it is, and it all fits into the story. But let's touch on what really should have stopped his career from the get-go. So I wrote a piece on Medium, just kind of really going through the timeline and what Arnim Whisler said and what we know is a lie from all of Arnim's statements. So I'm going to post that down in the show notes if you want to read a little more in-depthly or read along with this video as well. Arnim Whisler, of course, still the majority owner of the Chicago Red Stars. In fact, he stepped back into the limelight when Chicago Red Stars announced their partnership with VfL Wolfsburg. Of course, partnering with that women's team to have a little bit of synergy there, a lot like what we saw with Angel City and the Mexican national team, a lot like what we see with LL Reign and Olympique Lyon, and on that similar level. And Arnim definitely seemed like he wanted to put himself front and center in this press release after a year and a half of not even being present. He's quoted in that article a ton, including saying there are deep similarities between our clubs and we share many philosophies. Now, I don't think that came out how he thought it was going to come out once we dig deep into what Arnim's seems like his philosophy is. So it was just last year that Arnim Whisler apologized in a public statement for hiring Rory Dames for not looking deep enough into his background. Arnim Whisler didn't run a background check into Rory Dames. And that's important because there are some things in his background that would give you an idea of his future behavior. In 1998, Rory Dames was investigated by Arlington Heights police for inappropriately touching a minor, for grooming his athletes, and for making sexual jokes around them, joking about blowjobs, and spending far too much time with players outside of soccer. So this was back in 1998. Over 20 players came forward to corroborate to the Washington Post, and the charges against Dames were eventually dropped. He did not go to jail. He was not forced to stop youth coaching because it's hard to, in any abuse lawsuit, it's hard to go against the status quo. And ultimately, it's hard to really prove that it happened when it's not necessarily in writing, and even when it is in writing sometimes. So the charges against Dames were eventually not followed up on, and not because they didn't hold merit. And the worst thing about this is Rory Dames, at the time, was the owner, the coach of Chicago Eclipse Select, which was, at the time, a select team, but, morphed itself into, in the Chicagoland area, the premier youth women's soccer organization. So Rory Dames is at the top of the pyramid. And once he gets to the Red Stars, he has such a direct, and even before then, because if you're wanting to go to college, a college coach relies so much on what your previous coaches will say, especially regarding your ability, your attitude, your work ethic. And a coach can definitely hold that over a player, especially if that player knows something about a coach. That's a way that an abusive coach, an abusive person that is in coaching, can hold that over the head of an athlete. And if you've been an athlete, if you've known an athlete who has gone through a spell of an abusive coaching situation, it's a hell that you cannot get out of. I went through this my senior year and my freshman year of college. When you have different coaches who come in and out, you can't always transfer. At the pro level, if you're signed to a contract, you can't always get out of that situation. And at the youth level, he's the coach for the entire organization. And the only way to change is to leave your friends, to, tell your parents, which sometimes kids don't do because they feel embarrassed. It's a abusive situation, and one where Rory Dames knew that he held this power over these youth athletes. If Arnim Whisler would have done a background check, he would have seen these allegations, these questionings, these things being brought up against him. Dames would continue with the Chicago Eclipse Select before being offered that Chicago Red Stars job in 2011 when Arnim Whisler took the team to the WPS, the WPSL, WPSL Elite, and eventually helping to start the NWSL. Arnim Whisler has been around for a while, and he was instrumental in starting the NWSL from the leagues that we had before. But just because someone was there in the beginning does not mean they need to be there now. And clearly, it is beyond time that Arnim Whisler sells the Chicago Red Stars. Whisler had already been familiar with Rory Dames. From his time with the Eclipse, from Whisler's time in the Chicago sporting scene, he knew about Rory Dames's reputation that preceded him. And at the time that Rory Dames stepped down, that the Washington Post series came out, he said in his public statement, "I've spoken with many players, and the experience they have told me about are unacceptable. I am further heartbroken this week after learning about the allegations from former youth players that involved the Chicago Red Stars former coach at the youth club he founded. There's no place for abuse of any kind in soccer." That's what he said in a public statement. Now, what we know is that, yes, Arnim may not have known about the youth accusations, but what he did know about were the accusations from Kristen Press, from various Chicago Red Stars teammates throughout, starting in 2015, all the way to Rory Dames' firing. He knew, Arnim Whisler knew, USSF knew, US Soccer knew, and NWSL knew. They all knew and did nothing about it until it was going to be made public and they had to deal with the backlash. And if you're not familiar of what these allegations are, Kristen Press, of course, a key part of this early Red Stars team, was named NWSL Team of the Year every year she was on the Red Stars, including, I think it was, 2015, she had 12 goals, 2 assists in 11 games, or 12 goals and assists, so 10 goals, 2 assists in 11 games, and just completely unreal performance by Kristen Press in that year. It's a story of fail-safes everywhere, just not working. Minors made complaints to the police, nothing happened. Red Star players made complaint to ownerships, they made complaints to USSF, they made complaints to NWSL, nothing happened. And US international players, like I said, made complaints to US Soccer. Nothing happened until public discourse became so loud that Arnim Whisler was forced to do something. But like I said, we know that ever since 2018, at least, he knew about those allegations. In his statements, he claimed he knew nothing about it. It's not true. And he whitewashed the whole firing of Rory Dames. Throughout those statements, he never mentions Rory Dames' name. That quote earlier and another quote saying, "Our newly appointed associate GM, former Red Stars player Michelle Lamnicki, will ensure that the head coach will no longer have primary responsibility for contracts and player personnel matters." That's all he said about the coaching situation. There's no talk of who Rory Dames was, what exactly Rory Dames did, and all claims of innocence. Arnim Whisler knew about the abuse and refused to take action, so he was forced by the barrage of incoming pressure. That's it. That's why Arnim Whisler should be forced to sell the team, should not be involved in this team, And ultimately, I feel bad for the Chicago Red Stars players and fans that have to deal with this, all while wanting to support the team but not wanting to support the owner. Anyway, like I said, that article will be posted down below if you want to read more of a timeline case by case. But thank you so much for watching. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video. A subscribe if you want to see more, some a little more serious like this, some a little more analytical things. We're always talking soccer here. But as always, my friends, we'll talk soon.